Hello again people, and welcome to my first mega theory. In this video, we will critically analyze the concept of choice within the story of Deltarune. We will go case by case and analyze every instance of choice in the story of Deltarune so far. Afterwards, we will deep dive into the philosophy of choice and soul. This video is meant to be a mega theory, very different how my other Deltarune theories have been structured. Usually I begin with an idea, travel down a thought process, and eventually lead it into a big theory by the end. This is not the case this time. You'll notice that this video is very long. The reason for that is because this video contains several theories spread across multiple points. I could make a singular video on each of these points, but that would get repetitive. So if you want to watch this video at your leisure, when you get bored, take a break and come back later when you want to watch some more, because really this video structure is all over the place. With all that being said, I hope you enjoy. Deltarune and its characters have told us on multiple occasions that our choices don't matter. Surely this can't be the case, because if it was, why does the weird route exist? Even so, if our choices don't matter, why even have choices to begin with? What if you were told that no matter what you did, no matter what you accomplished, it wouldn't matter? Why would you even try at that point? If someone told me that everything I've ever done or will do was predetermined and I had no say in the events of my own life, I would never make a choice again, because truly, my only choice at that point would be to not play. That would be the only true choice I had. Throughout the events of Deltarune, we, the player, are given many choices despite the game telling us they don't matter. Some choices are discarded, some are taken away, many are disregarded, leaving me wondering why even give us the choices to begin with. Sure, you could just argue from a meta perspective that Toby Fox wanted to temper expectations to prepare people for a more linear story. But aside from the story choices, we do have choices that affect the game. Which way to walk, what items to buy from the store, what combat style to use. All of these choices change the world of Deltarune, for better or worse. Every journey begins with a single step, so let's start from the beginning. The Goner Maker sequence is the player's first exposure to how the game handles choice. You are to choose between different but mostly similar pieces of a body while creating a form as instructed by the disembodied voice. After constructing a vessel, you give it a name and a gift of your choosing. It has already been proven that no matter what you do, it doesn't change anything within the game files. No matter what you choose, the voice informs you that the creation that you spent time crafting and naming will now be discarded. Even without the subversive addition towards the end of the sequence, this still doesn't coincide with character creators of other RPG-style games. Character creators in games are traditionally meant to give the player a sense of connection with the sprite that they will soon move across the screen. The added intimacy of creating your own protagonist that will represent you in this RPG world gives the player a sense of investment. However, this particular sequence is not exactly that. Up until the very end of this sequence, we are told that this thing we are creating is not meant to be us, but instead is a vessel that can supposedly have a voice all of its own. This sequence is borderline sadistic, as it makes you make something, name it, and give it a special gift to cherish, only to take it away for seemingly no reason. There are two main choices at play here, that of the voice and that of the player. The voice that speaks to you is asking you to follow its instructions, and you have a choice whether or not to play along. After watching gameplay of other YouTubers playing Deltarune for the first time, the majority of them put a sizable amount of care and thought into the construction of their vessel. They are choosing to engage with the world and the circumstances as it is being presented to them. When their creation is discarded, some of them are noticeably upset or annoyed. I believe the entire Goner Maker sequence is a primer for how we are to engage with the story of Deltarune, should we choose. Next we come to the school partner choice. In hindsight, it's actually funny that this is even a choice considering the number of students in the class. See, if we do some quick math, 9 is not evenly divisible by 2, so there is always going to be a group of 3 unless someone makes partners with an egg. Chris arrived late to class, so they have no choice on what partner to pick. Aside from Temmie and the egg, each of the other groups of 2 have intention. Noelle and Birdley are the 2 highest grades in the class. Caddy and Jockington are self-proclaimed always partners. Monster Kid and Snowdrake hang out regularly outside of school. Truly, Chris and Susie also have a reason to be partners as well. They are the class outsiders. The students are much more accepting of Chris than Susie for obvious reasons, but even so, Chris and Susie are classified as outsiders, least likely to be picked for a partner. Once again, Toby Fox gives us the illusion of choice. Seemingly, we have the ability to change the way the story progresses, through the choice of a partner to create a school project. Each of these students have a different level of history with Chris. as well as different motivations in what they want to do for their school project. In the many alternate timelines where Chris was partners with someone else, the story would have been very different. So different that Chris might have not even stepped inside of Dark World. While outside the classroom, Chris sees Susie munching down on some chalk that was reported missing. Susie is well aware that the class cannot properly function without the chalk present, but doesn't care, because she's either hungry or doesn't want the class to progress anyways. Susie realizes that Chris is watching them a little too late. At this point, we know that Susie picks on Chris for her own reasons, and in her mind, this is Chris's golden opportunity to get her in trouble and possibly kicked out of school. Susie chooses to threaten Chris in an attempt to keep them quiet regarding the disappearance of the chalk. In reality, I would say that even if Susie was found out, I don't think Alphys would care that much if Susie was eating the chalk. If anything, I think she would just mostly be confused. Nevertheless, Susie then decides to not bite Chris under the assumption that her threat was successful. She reiterates the line, "Your choices don't matter." To be honest, I always felt this line coming from Susie was a little bit too on the nose. I don't think Susie would say something like this in this way, but I digress. Susie presents the option for you to respond to her terms. You can either react positively or negatively to what Susie has demanded of you. Even a small choice like this one, to simply convey how you feel about a certain situation is presented, and then ripped away from you. Later, after falling into the Dark World, you meet the fluffy boy Rouse. Rouse asks you to listen to the legend of the Deltarune, and something amazing happens. Your choice actually changes how the story unfolds. If you choose to listen to the legend, Rouse thanks you both, and Chris and Susie are brought up to speed on the prophecy, which then Lancer interrupts and the fight ensues. However, if you choose not to listen to the tale, Rouse is taken aback by your decision, but still respects it. Rouse respects your choice. Yes, Lancer still fights you. However, the turn of events leading to the fight are different. The change is subtle, and even a little insignificant, but still there. The effects of your choices are something that Rouse warns you about. Despite how the game has reinforced the idea that your choices don't matter, here comes Rouse singing a different tune. Rouse implores us to avoid fighting enemies with violence at all costs, quite openly saying that if we don't, then we might not like the outcome of this story. This is one of the many red flags that has led people to believe that Rouse knows more than what he is saying, almost implying that he has lived through the events already. Whatever his reasons, Rouse highlights a point when it comes to the choices you make. If you treat people nicely, they will more than likely do the same. This was a constant theme of Undertale, almost to the extreme. Characters try to kill you out of prejudice or what they believe is necessity. Only through a true pacifist playthrough do they stop and begin to see you as a friend. I really wish this wasn't the case, but that's just not how the world works. Everyone has their own choices to make, and just because you treat them nicely doesn't mean that they will do the same. This is illustrated through the Spade King. The real question is, would this ever affect your choice? If you knew that every enemy you spared would still hate you at the end of the game, would you still choose to do so? This is a question you need to ask yourself. Would you still spare someone even if you knew, given the chance, they would kill you and think nothing of it? Did you do the true pacifist playthrough in Undertale because you wanted a happy ending, or was it because you truly didn't want to hurt anyone? Would you have acted the same way if you knew that it wasn't going to change the outcome? This is the question that Toby Fox's new game is presenting us with. Deltarune is a test. Are you a good person because you want to be treated like a good person? Or do you want to do it because it's the right thing to do? Speaking of sparing enemies, now would probably be a good time to talk about Deltarune's battle system. Despite what we are told, the way we fight the Dark Denizens determines how they treat us towards the end of Chapter 1. The really interesting thing about the combat that is unique to Chapter 1 is the mechanic of Susie herself. Susie acts independently at this point in the story, attacking every enemy that she sees. You have the choice to let her act as she likes, or warn enemies about her impending attack. Before, it was only the question of your own actions. Now, you are responsible for the actions of yourself and other people. I say responsible, but really it doesn't take a lot of effort to push the warning option before you begin acting on an enemy. Now, it's obvious to most people that hurting others is wrong. You shouldn't want to do that because you are causing someone else pain. Any normal person would be obliged to take an extra step to make sure that an angry purple monster doesn't physically harm any more people than she already has. However, just for the sake of this thought experiment, let's just say that Susie isn't hurting people per se. She's just punching an inanimate object. Well, an inanimate object that isn't known to be sapient. In this hypothetical situation, which person's choice would you think matters more? Both you and Susie supposedly have free will, and it's clear that your choices don't coincide with each other. So, what would you do? Would you respect Susie's wishes and allow her to attack the non-sapient objects, or would you stop Susie from doing so because it goes against your choice? Notice how your response might change when someone else is getting hurt. You could still make the argument that interfering with Susie's choice is not right. Yes, the Darkners have feelings, but without the Dark Fountain, they all just go back to being building block toys or playing cards. What's the point of warning enemies about Susie's attacks if you don't even know that the pain they feel is real? Personally, I would take the extra step of warning the Darkners anyway, just to be safe. But if you chose not to, then at this stage in the story, I honestly couldn't tell you if that was wrong or not. At first I wasn't going to bring up the thrash machine, as I would chalk that up to a recurring joke. However, the very existence of the thrash machine within chapters 1 and 2 is a direct contradiction to the statement that has been made several times. Our choices don't matter. Then why does our design of the thrash machine return fully functional in chapter 2, used both by and against us? Is it just for laughs? Is it Toby just reusing assets? Is he trying to get our hopes up? Everything about the incorporation of the thrash machine in chapter 2 would imply that time and effort was put into the development process to remember the selection of pieces, regardless of their usefulness. I think the pattern has become quite obvious at this point, so I'm going to stop beating around the bush and address the obvious connection. In the light world, you have no choice. Your choices don't matter, and no matter what you do, the outcome will always be the same. As soon as you enter the dark world, the things you choose start to have weight. Your decisions, whether you believe they are originating from the player or Chris, have a profound effect on the world itself. Rousey's words are true. If you are nice and respectful of the dark denizens, they will come to your aid and overthrow the king willingly. Fight your way through them, and while no one will die, their opinion of you will be very negative. It's not a lot of extra freedom, but from Chris's perspective, this is an absolute improvement to what was going on before. Taking this into consideration, it's no wonder why Chris would be tempted to open up another dark world by themselves. They want this power of choice to expand and continue to affect every facet of their life. They want to choose, they want to get invested, they want to see where this new story will take them. That's why they open up the door at the end of chapter 2. They want the dark world to bleed into the real world. Now we're going to skip ahead to the card castle, with Lancer's momentary betrayal. This turn of events allows us to talk about why people make their choices. Lancer is loyal to his father at this point in the story, but is also fond of Susie. Being aware of Susie's temperament and her affinity for violence, Lancer knows exactly what choice Susie will make should she and the Spade King were to ever meet. Lancer understands that the same goes for his father. Understanding what would happen, Lancer makes arrangements to capture Susie and the other Lightners, taking away their choice. Choices are often influenced by information. Because of the current information that Lancer has, he is motivated to make the choice that benefits his interests. Only after acquiring new information does he change his mind. Susie also changes her mind to prompt this. Susie would rather talk things out with the Spade King because she knows the opposite choice would change how Lancer feels about her. Throughout the course of chapter 1, Susie undergoes a change. Before, she disregarded how others felt. When Lancer shows interest in her life and in her well-being, she begins to get a taste of compassion. She can't bring herself to hurt Lancer, and arguably she was never going to begin with. This begs the question, was Susie always going to spare Lancer? Or did she do so because Lancer was nice to her? The only person who could ever really know the answer would be Toby Fox. Had Susie not gone through this change, had she maintained her stance that anyone who stands in her way is her enemy, would Susie have taken Lancer out of the equation? Did Susie make her choice because of how Lancer acted, or did Susie make her choice because it was her choice? This is a question that has been a contentious topic in the world of philosophy for hundreds of years. The battle between determinism versus free will. Determinism is the idea that you are not truly free and all of your choices or events that take place in your life are formed solely because of previous events. According to determinism, Susie did not truly make the choice to spare Lancer. She only followed this course of action because she valued Lancer's life. She valued Lancer's life because Lancer was nice to her and made her feel good about being herself. Lancer did this because he was under the impression that Susie was trying to help him be more scary with his threats, so on and so forth. Every single effect takes place after a previous cause. This line of thinking is purely logical, but unfortunately, if you believe in this concept of hard determinism, then you cannot also believe that you are responsible for your own actions. Free will does not exist in a hard deterministic world. People who follow free will understand that the world itself is deterministic, meaning that the world has rules that are followed like cause and effect. If you throw a ball up into the air, then gravity determines how fast the ball will come crashing back to the ground. This is understood and acknowledged by people who believe in free will, but the key difference is that they value the subjective experience. They believe that if you have a mind, you can act freely and change the world of your own volition. Because of your own subjective experiences, these events have shaped your viewpoint of the world around you. Free will exists under the idea that you may have chosen one outcome, but many other outcomes were possible. For instance, Susie could have submitted to her anger and killed Lancer, and as a result, reverted back to her old ways and, most likely, falling down a path closer to Chapter 1's non-existent version of the Snowgrave route. The events and decisions that have transpired throughout your life have done so and have an effect on you. But because you have free will, you can choose what to do with this information. I'm not here to tell you what to believe, but I will say that Susie made her choice and I'm very happy that she made it. Soon after Susie frees everyone, she decides to have a private conversation with Chris. The conversation is brief, but what I really want to talk about is Susie and the way she ignores us. From the beginning up until this point, Susie has disregarded the group in any action that Chris has requested of her. After realizing that she knows nothing about resolving conflicts peacefully, Susie finally puts her trust in Chris. She is choosing to act alongside Chris and Rousey because she knows that they will not want to hurt the king. This is not a capitulation of her beliefs. She makes it very clear that when acting, she does not like to play nice. In almost every act, Susie protests, giving her own reasoning on why the choice is not what she would do. Even so, she decides to go along with your commands to some degree. Even though she doesn't believe in the same ideal, she chooses to listen to us. Chapter 1's ending is one that myself and the majority of the fanbase never saw coming. Chris springs out of their bed and slides to the center of the room. The way that Chris is moving is completely different to the way in which they have been up until this point, implying that they are moved by a separate force. Chris's shoulders are stiff, but their arms are loose, almost as if they are a puppet on a string. The way that Chris's body is situated in the scene almost shares a likeness to Spamton Neo's body during his boss fight. The similarities are small, but still there. Whatever this force is, it is making a choice. This force is taking control of Chris against both their will and that of the players, seemingly because it doesn't want us to stop it from doing whatever it's doing. Much like Lancer locked Susie in the dungeon knowing her intentions, this entity knows our intentions. Whatever this thing is, it is knowingly subjugating us, so that it can move freely, albeit for a short period of time. Perhaps this process cannot be sustained for long, and the entity would rather not leave Chris without their soul, so they may survive long enough to be controlled again. Maybe this is Chris themselves re-establishing control of their own body. But if that was the case, then why do they appear to only be in control of some parts of their own body? Why are they sliding around in such an unnatural way? If we are acting on Chris, then why doesn't Chris move this way all the time? If we were an outside actor controlling Chris the same way this entity was, why is Chris's movement so much more normal than this way? It's almost as if Chris is being controlled from a distance. Perhaps it's from inside the bunker. Maybe it's from another place entirely. Whatever this thing is, I really hope we can stop it before it hurts someone that Chris cares about. So here we are in Chapter 2, and just like we were told, nothing we ever did in Chapter 1 mattered at all. Whether we attacked or spared the Darkners, it didn't change anything. Chris still became possessed, ripped out their soul, and gave us the best Kara Undertale impression we've ever seen. Except, no, things are not the same, both in the light world and the dark. If we talked to Noelle previously and told her that Susie likes eating chalk, she gives Susie a box of chalk as a gift. If we fought Javelin 1, we received one of the shadow crystals. Things are different here, where they could have been the same. Maybe Deltarune isn't entirely deterministic. When we make our way back to the castle town, Rousey tells us that any Darkners we spare will be brought back here. Any Darkners we don't spare will supposedly remain inside their respective Dark World forever. This system of keeping track of Darkners that we spare implies that there are differences in what our castle town will look like. Now we get to see the effects of our decisions. This doesn't necessarily change the outcome of the story, but the fact that we either do or do not recruit everyone is addressed directly by the characters in this story. If we don't recruit every normal enemy in Chapter 2, then Newbert refuses to leave the cyber world, much to the Queen's dismay. If we do the Snowgrave route, she will mention how sparse the castle town is. Whatever this means for the future of Deltarune, It seems as though our choices mattered more than we were led to believe. After the fight with Birdley, the gang finds itself down in the dumps. Seemingly out of nowhere, Rouse gives the idea that it would be better if the group split up. This isn't the first time that the paths have split for the three Lightners, so honestly I have no idea why Rouse is suggesting this course of action. Rouse asks which person Chris would like to go with, himself or Susie. The game, like many times before, waits patiently as you decide which of your friends you would like to explore with. No matter what you choose, Susie takes control of the situation and takes Rouse with her, questioning the idea of why Chris is always the one who gets to choose. This outburst could also be stemming from the previous fight with Sweet Captain Cakes. Chris, up until this point, has been the only one who can perform actions. This system worked perfectly fine in Undertale, but now we have 3 protagonists and 3 people to keep track of. There is no legitimate reason why Susie and Rouse cannot act aside from the one that Rouse gives, saying that it is Chris's special ability. Something interesting to note about this whole situation is when Rouse begins to act on his own, he apologizes to Chris, almost as if he feels guilty for obtaining a new level of freedom he never had before. Chris, as we believe, is shackled under the control of ourselves and this third entity. The ability to act was something that Chris had, which made them unique. Susie had her strong attacks, Rouse could heal people, but Chris was the one who could tie the group together with their ability to act. Chris could use their unique and powerful human soul to connect with the other party members. In Chris's limited state, the sight of seeing other people obtain that freedom in the blink of an eye would be very upsetting. I'm sorry, Chris, I had to beat the boss fight. Despite who you prefer to spend time with, we do get some alone time with both our party members. You get to spend time with Rouse later in the Acid Tunnel of Love. I'll be damned if that's not an allegory for the relationship between these two characters. According to Tea Theory, Chris only heals for 60 HP when they drink Rouse tea. Many people interpret this as Chris not caring for Rouse in the same capacity as Rouse would for Chris. My objection to this thought process would be simply that Chris literally met Rouse a day ago. We, the player, love Rouse because we've had a long time to understand Rouse as a person through their actions, because we have known Rouse for years. Chris, on the other hand, only met Rouse a day ago. Going back to the allegory interpretation, I would have to say that Rouse genuinely cares about Chris, but the acid that they float on throughout the sequence symbolizes a slippery slope. Any jolt or careless quick movement could send one of them to an excruciating demise. Perhaps instead, the acid is meant to symbolize the way that Rouse's appearance makes Chris feel. Chris has spent a long time without their brother, and seeing them again could make Chris feel uneasy. During this reprieve from the adventures and people trying to capture them, Rouse shares his perspective. Before, he simply thought that all you had to do was be kind to people, and then you could be friends with everyone. Rouse explains how it's nice to just spend time with Chris. You have the option to reciprocate the same sentiment, or to disregard Rouse's feelings as strange. But what this choice truly asks of the player is what they value in their friends. What do you want out of the people you spend your time with? Would you still love a person's company even though they barely said anything? Do you need someone to initiate the conversation and lead the interactions? Do you want someone to really listen to what you are saying, and respond with a thoughtful answer to make you feel like you are being taken seriously? Or do you not need any of that? Is simply the presence of another living being enough for you? And to feel like you're not alone, is it enough for someone to simply be there beside you and share in this experience we call life? Considering how Chris is an introvert and how they speak, I think I know what they would choose. When your journey comes to an end, there is a camera towards the end of the ride giving you 4 options when it comes to taking a picture. You can choose to do a rude gesture, which I can only assume is Chris flipping off the camera. This option takes on a more rebellious tone. You refuse to play along with the sappy nature of the whole situation. This decision most likely picked for laughs, just to see what Rouse's reaction would be. If not for laughs, it would most likely be because this is what you thought Susie would do in this situation. She does approve of the picture when you show it to her later. Inversely, the hug option is the option that more closely resembles what Rouse would do in this situation. This wouldn't be the first time that the choices you had coincided with your 2 party members. Perhaps this recurring theme is a reference to how the people around you can influence you and your choices. Hang out with more crass and violent people and you'll end up being more crass and violent. The neutral option, as I call it, is where you raise your hand and give a peace sign. This is probably the most interesting out of the 4 options. Chris isn't stupid, they know where the camera is, so when we give the command to give a peace sign, they turn to us rather than the camera. Rousey does the same, completely oblivious. The real question would be, why does Chris choose now to mess with us? Chris is a known prankster, so maybe this is their way of being rebellious towards you and our control over them. We, the player, want a nice normal picture of Chris and Rousey giving the peace sign. To mess with us, Chris turns the other way. This actually makes me question why Chris doesn't mess with us for the other photos. Maybe they just can't think of anything for those? Maybe it's because we're choosing the peace sign option is why they turn to the camera. Chris is taking this special opportunity to send us a message, saying, "Hey, you didn't make me throw up the middle finger, or hug this weird nice stranger that looks like my brother. You're taking good care of me and you respect my boundaries. Thank you." Maybe it's a little bit of both. Then we have the final option to simply not participate. You can choose to not pose at all. Ignore the choice because you know no matter what you do, it doesn't make a difference. I'd like to think that the peace sign option is Chris's favorite. The next choice is actually a series of choices. Much like Joel that I chose not to fully cover until now, Spamton, the secret boss of Chapter 2, employs us to complete a series of tasks in hope that one day he'll be free. Jevil was a demonic jester type character who had an affinity for chaos. Spamton is all about freedom on making his own deals and choices. Jevil is clearly the one being confined, but he insists that he is the one with true freedom. From this I can only discern two explanations. One, he has gone insane after coming to the realization that his entire life has been part of a game, and instead of falling into despair, he chooses to recontextualize this epiphany into something more positive. He believes he is now free of the bonds of this system because he understands the system, a cheerful, nihilistic point of view where he simply says, "If life is just a game, then I will play all day." The other is a more symbolic sort of freedom. Jevil sees his cage as a separate place, a safe haven away from the faux reality the other Darkners are forced to live in. In his mind, the other Darkners are trapped inside their own mindset, believing that they are free when really they are not. In this interpretation, Jevil believes that he is the only one capable of making decisions. Essentially, Jevil sees everyone else the exact same way that we see him. Either way, the story of Jevil is pretty depressing. You start saying things that make people think you're crazy, even though they have slight validity to them. Your most trusted friend, Sean, locks you up because you're crazy. Spamton, in a way, suffered the same fate. Spamton met someone and started acting very differently. Because of this change, his friends, the other Addisons, treated him like an outsider, jealous of his newfound wealth. Perhaps the freedom that Spamton was seeking was economic freedom. The ability to live comfortably is a freedom that too few people get to experience. You can choose to go along with Spamton's plot or just leave him be. If you carry out the route to its entirety, you receive another shadow crystal. Spamton schemes and deals with the Lightners to get what he wants, and he almost gets it. When he realizes he is nothing without his strings to hold him in place, he finally begins to concede that he was never meant to be free. He was a pawn from the beginning. Ever since Chapter 1, a theory was made in regards to our relationship with Deltarune's main protagonist, Chris. We are dropping in and seizing control away from this person who was so misunderstood to begin with that no one has been able to see that another being is controlling them, aside from Noelle. To be fair, most of us didn't realize this at first. Only with the extra knowledge given to us by talking to the correct NPCs do we come to this conclusion. Chris at the moment is our only way of interacting with this piece of fiction. So, really, despite how you feel, this is the way we have to play the game should we choose to. But what if, hypothetically, the person controlling Chris wasn't a nice person? What if the person sees this game as their own personal playground, where you can do whatever you want without consequences? What if you, the player, come to the realization that you can control Chris, and instead of thinking about the moral implications, you simply give a sadistic smile? By interacting with this little world, you can make Chris do a lot of things, so maybe you can make other people do things as well. Noelle looks like an easy target. Thus, the Snowgrave route was discovered. No, I'm not saying the person who initially discovered this was sadistic. I'm saying that if you think the Snowgrave route is fun to play, you might want to go seek professional help. Snowgrave is completely optional. You actually have to go far out of your way to complete the entire route from start to finish. The choice of continuing down this course of action is completely on the player themselves. What is the endgame to Snowgrave? If I had to make a guess right now with the limited knowledge we have, the purpose of manipulating Noelle to do our bidding would be to get to Susie. It is made very clear that Susie is immune to the player's influence. There are many instances in which we give commands to Susie, but she refuses to listen. She does not obey. You tell Susie to go right, she goes left. You want to spend time exploring with Rouse, Susie takes away your choice. Susie can be influenced by the people that she cares about. If I were to momentarily put myself into the shoes of a mentally ill person who was looking to make Susie do what I say, I would start with the girl she potentially has feelings for. Then, I would use her favorite parental figure like Toriel, and wouldn't you know, who is pretty much confirmed to be trapped inside Chapter 3's Dark World. If I have to be honest, I hate talking about the Snowgrave route because, in a way, it's worse than the genocide route in Undertale. Instead of taking responsibility into your own hands and killing everyone yourself, you are forcing an already misunderstood teenager to manipulate one of their best friends to do the killing for you. I couldn't imagine the horrors that will await us in future Snowgrave equivalent routes, where you end up with a group of catatonic zombies that used to be your friends. To turn away from that depressing note, I think it's time we wrap things up with a simple yet effective choice to cap off the chapter. Before the entity takes possession of Chris once again and opens the next Dark World, Susie casually brings up the festival that is to take place most likely during the final chapter, if not close to it. While downplaying her interest in this event, she asks Chris who they would rather take. Susie gives you a choice between Rouse and Noelle. Both of her given responses, when chosen, are not done so sincerely by Chris, most likely because Rouse is a Darkner, presumably unable to leave the Dark World, and Noelle is an old friend, more akin to a sibling of Chris. If you choose to remain silent, Chris stares at Susie. Judging from Susie's reaction, they could be smiling. Finally, we can make Chris say, "you." Taken aback by this response, Susie disregards this answer as dodging the question. She then remarks that, obviously, if Chris ever went to the festival at all, Susie wouldn't be far away. This informs us of how Susie sees her friendship with Chris. In her eyes, they are an inseparable pair. Rouse may bake cakes for Susie to eat, Noelle might make Susie happy, but Chris is the one who threw themselves into harm's way for her. Out of all of the other people Susie has known, it is quite possible that this is the nicest thing anyone has ever done for her. The added context of someone's inflection when answering a question can sometimes give you more information about how that person feels, more so than the actual answer itself. Susie doesn't understand this fully, but she does pay attention to these nuances. A choice is often fueled by intent. You wanted to go with the festival with Rouse, so you chose Rouse. But Susie is asking Chris, not you. So by using context clues, we can discern exactly what Chris wants. This deduction is something that people have been doing for a very long time when it comes to Chris and their true intentions. And there you have it. That's all of the instances of choice that I decided to go over. Yes, I know I didn't go over all of the decisions you get, but I feel like the ones I didn't go over weren't as important. Oh man, what's wrong? I feel so weak all of a sudden. Oh no, I'm suffering from a potassium deficiency. Sorry about that. I don't know what came over me. All joking aside, this decision does have some context to be analyzed. When the queen tells you to get the banana, you probably went for the banana for the funny. However, when you were given the same exact choice again, there is an outside influence that could change the way you feel about the choice. Rouse up until this point, and after, is your trusted healer, someone who dedicates his time and energy to make you happy. I would be surprised if Rouse wasn't securely at the top of many people's favorite character charts. Rouse in this instance is more abrasive, proclaiming that Chris would never do what Queen said. Psychology tells us that when someone makes a choice and they get a positive response from that choice, i.e. the funny potassium joke, haha, they are much more confident to make the same choice again. Your brains have determined that this choice is safe. It is an option that has been proven to have little to no negative consequences, so you are more than likely to make the same choice again. However, like I said, Rouse gives you a reason to not make the same choice. Truly, both outcomes for this choice are inconsequential. Rouse doesn't really care if you get the banana or not. If you decide to get it, Rouse actually encourages your choice. While I have this idea fresh in my head, Rouse does this quite a lot. He respects Chris's unique ability to act, even though it technically makes his life more difficult. And when he asks if you see him as your lackey or not, if you say no, he gives a sigh of relief. But if you say yes, Rouse, you are my lackey, he gets excited, stated that he's never been anyone's lackey before. Rouse, are you good? It's always good to have a positive outlook on life, but there is such a thing as toxic positivity. You can absolutely be over-accommodating to the point where you could enable awful behavior. At least we know that there are some times where he draws the line. You know what's something that's always intrigued me? The way in which we select an option presented to us when making a choice. The red soul is used in the dialogue box. The first interpretation that comes to mind is that by using the soul itself, we inflict our will onto the world when choosing these options and hope to change it. The soul is the culmination of our being. It encapsulates everything we are that isn't physical. I would like to take this time to talk about the soul itself and how it is presented in Deltarune. To do so, we're going to need some help from someone called Plato. Now I know what you're thinking. What does ancient Greece have to do with Deltarune? Way more than anyone has mentioned before. For starters, the very name of the game, Deltarune. Delta is the fourth letter in the Greek alphabet. This makes me wonder why there are 3 Delta warriors when Delta means 4. The roaring in which we are trying to stop will be brought about by the Titans. Titan is a word that is exclusively Greek in origin, as it is a word used to describe the primordial Titan gods, in which there are 12. Initially, I thought about relating the 12 Titans to people in Chris's personal life, but nothing really fits that well. In Greek mythology, the Titans were the rulers before the Greek gods that most people are familiar with. Cronus had a child named Zeus, who rose up, fought back against his father, in what is known as the War of Titanomachy. I think I'm pronouncing that right. When the Titans were defeated, most of them were imprisoned in Tartarus, or an empty void of punishment. What really intrigued me was the Greek fascination and their interpretation of the soul. The ancient Greeks probably weren't the first people to come up with the idea of the soul, but they definitely talked about it a lot. Today we are going to specifically be talking about Plato. Plato's theory of the soul is as follows. Plato believed that the soul and the body were separate. The body itself is everything physical about a person, everything you can see. The soul is immaterial, but it is essential for motion. A physical object cannot move by itself, so the soul is what is performing the motion. Plato also believed in reincarnation. When somebody dies, the soul persists and proceeds to inhabit a new body. It is reincarnated, based on how you live your life. If you are a good and noble person, your soul gets reincarnated into another person. If you are an angry, animalistic person, your soul is reincarnated into an animal. The soul itself is made of 3 pieces. 1. Your appetite, or your desires. Number 2. The rationale, the part of you that incorporates reasoning, the part of you that thinks about the consequences of its actions. Finally is number 3. Your spirit. Your spirit is comprised of your elevated and strong emotions, like your sense of justice, nobility, courage, and of course, your determination. You can probably see where I was going with this. If you think I'm done there, wait till you hear this. There is an allegory that is associated with Plato's belief of the soul. There is a person riding a chariot holding the reins of 2 horses, each pulling in different directions. The spirit part of the soul is represented by a light horse. The appetite is represented as a dark horse. The rationale is the person driving the chariot. Do you understand what all this means? Think back to the end of chapter 1. When Chris rips their soul out of their body, it briefly flashes white. Have you ever wondered why it does that? I always have. It seemed like such a deliberate choice for Toby to make, and until now, I had no idea what it meant. Chris's soul was split into 2 parts. The spirited part, the white part, and the rationale, the person controlling the chariot, split from the appetite, the part of the soul that acts on its desires. Torio blames Chris for eating all the pie at the beginning of chapter 2. This is the same part of Chris that carelessly opens up a dark fountain because they want to continue having fun adventures in the dark world. Chris's soul has split, and their desires are taking on a life of its own. Chris has lost the reins of their chariot, and the dark horse is driving Chris all the way to the ground. Literally. The only question is, how did all of this happen? What happened to Chris which made their soul split? Unfortunately, without proper context, most likely the context we'll get when all of Deltarune has been released, we can't say for sure. To cap off Deltarune's connection to Greek mythology, I have one more theory. Let's call this cave theory. Let me tell you about Plato's allegory of the cave, and while I do that, I'm just going to put a picture of Jevil here for no particular reason. Jevil is just here to save me some time for editing, and no other reason whatsoever. Imagine a group of people are born inside a cave. They are chained inside this cave their entire lives and have no knowledge about the world outside of the cave. There is a fire burning to give them some light, but they can never see outside the cave. They can only see the shadows of things that pass by the cave. The people trapped inside the cave are delighted with the shadows passing in front of them and talk about nothing but the shadows and how they feel about them. One day, one of the captives breaks their chains and escapes the cave and ventures into the outside world. The blinding light of the natural world is agonizing to them at first, but eventually their eyes adjust. They learn to see the truth behind the shadows and realize how wrong they were about what they knew. Reality was finally clear to this person. They could see everything clearly for the first time. This person ventured back into the cave to explain to them what reality actually was. They explained that the people in the cave have only been looking at shadows their entire life, and the real things awaited them outside of the cave. The people inside the cave disregarded everything that the escapees said. In Plato's allegory, the people within the cave become enraged with the escapee, and even eventually try to kill them. But you can probably see where I'm going with this. The outside of the cave is reality. The light world is reality. Have you ever wondered why Spamton and Jevil don't have real-world counterparts? At least, physical ones. Physical counterparts that we can take. The secret bosses don't join you in the Castletown Dark World because they have found a way to escape into reality. They are Darkners that can survive inside the light world. The amount of similarities in these allegories really had me thinking that Toby Fox was a Greek philosophy nut at some point. Maybe he still is. I would be intrigued to see how much more of Greek philosophy can help us indirectly theorize about Deltarune in the future. Maybe I'll make another video in the future that talks more about this. Hey everyone, like I said earlier, this video's format is all over the place. So much so that I don't really have a plan for an outro, so I'll just put it here. If you made it to this point in the video, I just wanted to say thank you. You could have chosen any video to watch while you ate some food, but you chose mine. But that's pretty much it. This is my Deltarune Mega Theory. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I would love to hear what all of you have to say about the theories in this video. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you have counter evidence that would completely rip these theories apart? Either way, please let me know. Thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye.